evening, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. I'm Lisa Friend, and I'm delighted to be back as your host this evening as we have a wonderful show with frequent collaborator Cameron Hewitt. Cameron Hewitt spent his spring researching guidebooks and leading tours, and he's here to share his fresh out of the rucksack information, and we're so happy to have him join us. Welcome, Cameron.
Thank you, Lisa. It's so great to be back on Monday Night Travel. Thanks for having me.
How many times have you been with us now? It's quite a few.
I think this is my 5th time, but you know, I have a whole new appreciation for it. I always enjoy doing it, but on my travels this year, a few times I've been recognized by people on the streets of Europe who run up to me and say, I saw you on Monday Night Travel. And I'm realizing I knew this was a great thing, but just people love this program. And I think it was really a great lifeline for people during the pandemic, stuck at home. Really meant a lot to people, and I'm glad we're still doing it. And boy, you and Gabe and Julianne and Ben have just done such an amazing job of putting this together and creating a real community. And it's fun being part of that community.
Thank you. We're glad. It is. It's a community of travelers. And we appreciate your being willing to come along with us on this ride as often as you have. Yeah. So you are back on the show with us, but you spent many, many weeks. I went to Europe, led some tours, came back, led other tours, and you were still there the whole time. So take us to Europe with you and let us know what you did this spring.
Yeah, I counted it up. I've been gone nearly 90 days so far in 2022, split over 2 trips, February and March, and then May and June. Most of it's been guidebook research. So tonight I'll be talking about London, Rome, Italy, and a lot about Scotland, which is the most recent place I've been to. And then also in there somewhere, I managed to go on our brand new Best of Poland tour as a tour guide. So a little bit of tour guiding, a whole lot of guidebook research.
Fantastic. What have you got to share with us?
Yeah, let's get started. There's a lot to cover, as you can imagine. Yeah, and all of us here at Rick Steves Europe we kind of had to go from 0 to 100 to get back up to speed. And, you know, we were all kind of waiting for a couple of years. And it was kind of fun for me because back in February, I was the first of our many guidebook researchers to head back out into the field. So I was kind of leading the vanguard. I kind of felt like, remember when we were kids, Lisa, we used to have first day of school pictures where you kind of get dressed up and your mom takes your picture. And that's kind of what I did when I got on the plane to Europe. I had my wife take my picture like, I'm ready to go to Europe once again. And it really felt great to be back. So I strapped on my N95 and 8 hours later, I was in London. And so that was my first assignment, was to update our London guidebook. That's a big book. It's 600 pages. And I had about 12 days to update it for the post-pandemic reality. And that was a lot of hard work, but it was also really, really enjoyable. You know, I'll talk a little bit later about what goes into guidebook research, but at the end of the day, you just got to put one foot in front of the other. So that first morning I said, what do? I guess I'll just go to Westminster Abbey. Went inside. It was really kind of pleasantly uncrowded in Westminster Abbey. At that time of year, it was still pretty quiet. And about an hour later, I came out and I'd had, this is 2 pages out of 600 full of notes, but we had the new information ready for a new edition. So from there, I went around London and did all the big sites. You know, of course, I went to the British Museum and the Tower of London. And back then it was really nice because it's not the case so much anymore. But, we were just coming out of the pandemic at that point. It was kind of the end of the Omicron surge. And so places were still pretty empty and things were just opening up. So it was kind of nice to have places to myself. But, I really also made a point, in addition to all of the major sites I had to see, I really wanted to do some fun things just for myself, because I got a little burned out, quite frankly, before the pandemic, 2018, 2019. I was getting a little bit weary of all the guidebook research. And so I decided, sort of my 2022 resolution was, I want to find things to enjoy, to slow down and relax, and to just really enjoy being in Europe and not forget what a privilege it is to be traveling again. So for example, I had a beautiful sunny weekend and I decided to go out to the bedroom community of Richmond. And I'll admit, I partly wanted to go to Richmond because this is where they filmed Ted Lasso. And, speaking of lifelines during the pandemic, I think a lot of us really latched onto this show in the dark days of the pandemic to sort of get us through and feel optimistic about something. So it's fun to kind of see the pub where they all hang out. And then I went and found right next to the pub actually is the lane that Ted Lasso lives on. I'm pretty sure that door on the left is where he lives. I'm pretty sure. But, once I was in Richmond, what I realized is it's just a beautiful town and it has this gorgeous village green. And I just sat out on the village green for 30 minutes and I watched dogs chasing tennis balls the whole time. I got to say, it was one of my favorite half hours I spent in London. And that kind of became a theme for me. In addition to all the big sites I'll be talking about, again, kind of finding these beautiful moments in between the big sites, finally getting to the stuff I'd always dreamed of doing. For example, I'm a big Beatles fan. I've been to London many times, but somehow I'd never been to Abbey Road. So one day I was on the tube and I realized, my tube goes right by Abbey Road. I thought, why don't I get out and spend a half hour to see the crosswalk where they took that famous album picture of the Beatles crossing Abbey Road. And so I think it's really important, especially now that we're back post-pandemic, not to just sort of go through the motions as we travel, but to really, really savor what we do and find moments that are special. Actually, I took some time off during the pandemic and I wrote a travel memoir called The Temporary European. And that was a really interesting process for me because I just collected all of my favorite stories from all my years of travels. And what I realized was I didn't really miss or really think much about all the big sites. What I really thought about were those fun little moments like sitting on that park bench in Richmond where I just felt like I was a temporary European for a moment. So as I talk through my slides tonight, I'm going to give a few more examples. And I hope it inspires you to kind of think about travel in that way, finding ways to really settle in and be part of European life rather than just be a sightseer. Now, it was a really interesting time to be there, of course, because COVID, like I said, the Omicron surge was just passing in London. And things were really in flux. I mean, a few months before, there were a lot of really strict regulations. And in London, at least, by February and March, they were being very much relaxed. So instead of seeing signs that masks were mandatory, you were seeing a lot of signs that we kind of encourage mask wearing. This picture, I thought, really captured what was going on in London at that time. And in a lot of ways, what's gone on in Europe for the last few months. There's been this sort of slow process from really strict COVID restrictions to kind of suggestions. And it kind of makes it hard to know what to do. I will say, especially back on that first trip, I was really careful about masking. I always wore masks, even though it wasn't required on public transportation or in a busy museum. I went to a couple of plays, which is something I'd love to do in London. I didn't want to miss out on that. And I felt like if I had a good N95 mask, I could still do that. The other thing I did a lot of was testing. You can buy tests at any pharmacy in the UK now for £2 a piece, $2.50. And so that was a really easy way for me to kind of keep track in case a couple of days after I arrived in London, I wanted to make sure I hadn't picked anything up on the plane. If I was going to see somebody, spend some time with somebody who might be vulnerable, I would test beforehand. So that was another sort of precaution that I took. I didn't want to pass it around. It was interesting in terms of the way that COVID changed things. Obviously, we had a lot to update in our guidebooks. There's a lot to do. And one of the things that Rick and I were the most concerned about were all of these wonderful people that we have in our guidebooks. We have a lot of kind of mom and pop businesses, B&Bs, restaurants, shops, small businesses that we love to connect our travelers to. And Rick and I talked about this a lot during the pandemic. We were really worried that a lot of those places would go out of business. And I'm really happy to say most of those places, the vast majority survived the pandemic. And we were really relieved when Rick and I started traveling again. He's been out doing research too, to find that these people are still doing great. In some cases, they've had to make adjustments. So one thing that I noticed as a trend this year at B&Bs in the UK, more and more places have a self-service breakfast. So instead of going to a big breakfast room where you sit down and have a cooked breakfast, they have kind of a do-it-yourself breakfast that they leave outside your door. And it was a really good breakfast, but it's kind of a different experience. I would say if you're traveling in 2022, it's kind of interesting to see some of these temporary COVID measures are slowly becoming permanent. A lot of places are figuring out they actually like doing it the new way. So for example, a few of the B&Bs in Scotland told me, now that we're doing the self-service breakfast, I think we might just keep doing it. So you should mention in the book, we don't do a big cooked breakfast anymore. And in other cases, they're still figuring it out. So it's kind of interesting to see how COVID is changing. And in some cases, things that were temporary, they're realizing they kind of liked it that way. So it's not so temporary after all. Another thing I really noticed in COVID, because of COVID, is that technology advanced very quickly. I feel like, sort of like here, I never ordered groceries on the internet before COVID, but I sure do now, and there's other things that we kind of adopted very quickly, doing Zoom presentations, for example. And I found that in Europe as well. So for instance, one thing that has really taken off in a huge way in Europe are these tap or contactless credit cards. In other words, a credit card, you don't have to swipe it or stick the chip and pin in, you just tap it against a pad. So for example, when you get on a tram or a bus in some cities, rather than buying a ticket, you can literally just tap your credit card against that pad that you see in the background, and it automatically deducts the fare, and then you're on your way. In London, in fact, when I was there in February and March, I realized it's almost cashless in London. I took out 200 pounds and I was barely able to spend it because it was so easy and so commonly accepted to just use my tap card. So if you're traveling in Europe in 2022, you should be aware in general of sort of technology advances, but this is one I would say, get a tap or contactless credit card. Your credit card company, you might already have one. A lot of credit cards are becoming standard with this. You might have gotten a new credit card and you didn't even notice. You see that little logo with the 4 curved lines. Maybe you didn't notice that that's on your credit card. Well, that means you don't have to swipe it anymore. You can tap it. So if you don't have a tap credit card, this is a good time to get one. And Lisa, I'm curious, you're somebody who travels a lot as well. How are you finding like the contactless stuff? Do you have any like favorite technology tips?
I love paying with my Apple Pay with my watch.
Oh, okay.
So I just hold it up and it scans it. I don't have to worry about getting in and out of my money belt or getting in and out of my wallet. I just go and I pay for things, transportation and restaurants. Love it.
That's great. Yeah, and it's a good reminder. So I'm talking about a physical credit card, but you can also, if you don't have a tap credit card, you can set up your phone or your watch, if you have a smartwatch, to work the same way. So I see people in London all the time. Some use a credit card, but a lot of people just tap their phone against the pad to get into the turnstile to get on the tube, for example. So it sounds a little bit scary, but once you get used to it, it makes things so much easier, and it's so widely accepted in Europe. It makes it very simple. So that's an example of some of those kind of COVID changes that you go away for a couple of years and you come back and everyone's tapping instead of swiping. Now, the other big theme that I've noticed this year is disruption. And I don't have to tell you, just like here, there's a lot of kind of transportation chaos going on in Europe these days. So for instance, when I was in London in March, there were 2 days of a tube strike. So the underground train system, which is critical in London, just was not running for 2 days. All of the stations were just locked up tight. And then in June, I was in Scotland and they had a national rail strike. So a lot of the intercity trains were not running either. The train station in Glasgow was locked up tight. I would say just be prepared for the fact that there's a lot of strikes going on these days in Europe. That's always sort of been the case, but I think with the economic downturn and some of the challenges they're facing and the staffing issues, there's more of these kinds of disruptions than there used to be. The good news is they're usually advertised in advance. So if you know about them, if you're following the news, you're aware, oh, the trains are not going to be running next Tuesday, so you have to make other plans. So I would say, rather than be caught unawares by this and just show up at a train station to find there's no trains running, if you're going somewhere, especially where this is prone to happen, follow the local news and kind of keep an eye out for updates about sort of anything that's happening in terms of strikes or disruptions. And of course, the other bigger disruption we're all hearing about on both sides of the Atlantic is air travel chaos. I mean, believe it or not, this is a picture I took on my way home of a normal, smooth connection. And even the smooth connections are pretty overwhelming these days. But yeah, just like here, Europe is struggling with not enough staff at airports, not enough planes to take people where they're going, delays, luggage getting lost, and so forth. I don't want to be a downer, but the reality is if you're traveling in Europe this year, it's important to be patient, be prepared, expect some of these disruptions. Rick's been recommending to people, if you can carry on your luggage, that's great, because then you're less likely to have your bag lost, or if you have to make a tight connection, not checking your bag guarantees that you're going to have it with you. Get to the airport early. Just be prepared for this kind of stuff. I don't think it's a deal breaker. I wouldn't take it as a reason not to travel, but it's definitely a time where you want to hang on to your patience. So speaking of flying from London, I flew down to Italy and to work on the Rome book. And it is interesting because different countries have different philosophies and approaches to COVID. So in London, there were basically no rules. Very few people were masking. But then I got to Italy. This was back in February and March. And it was much more restrictive. Indoor masking was required. You had to show your green pass to go in a restaurant. Now, I want to be clear, they're not doing that anymore in Italy. Over the course of the spring and summer, they've relaxed that. But it is a good reminder that each country has its own policies. So regardless of when you go, especially if there might be another surge on the horizon, you always want to check the restrictions for the country you're going to make sure you're ready for it. So I flew from London and I drove right from a 600-page guidebook in 12 days to a different 600-page guidebook in 10 days. This time I was updating the Rome book. And very much like in London, it was kind of fun to be doing all the big sites again at a time that actually wasn't that crowded, which was really pleasant. This is the Vatican, the St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. I've almost never seen it this empty, and I've definitely never seen this so empty. This is the map rooms at the Vatican museums. I mean, usually this is just a complete mob scene of people. So it was really kind of nice being there when it wasn't crowded. I don't want to mislead you. These days, it's getting crowded again in these places. But that's kind of the advantage sometimes of being the early bird, is that you get to avoid the worst of the crowds. So yeah, another very busy week and a half of research, doing all the big sites in Rome. And it was just fun being out and about, great weather, on the street with the Roman people. And I talked earlier about sort of being a temporary European, and this is another example. In addition to the big sites in Rome, I went to the Testaccio market, which is this beautiful market hall. Actually, it's not a beautiful market hall. It's a very local feeling market hall down in the south part of the city. And I got there and I realized you're just surrounded by mountains of artichokes. And then you realize, well, March in Rome is artichoke season. And it's kind of fun being in a place where people just get really excited about artichokes. And then you make sure you seek them out and have some when you go out to eat. So it's really fun to tune into those local customs as you go. Also, while I was in Rome, I did some other cities in Italy. I went down south to Naples, which was really fun to reconnect with that place. And then I headed up to Tuscany, and I got to spend time in a few of my favorite small cities in Italy. I was in Siena, beautiful city of Siena, Lucca, and then I also went to Pisa. Here again, I've never seen the Field of Miracles this uncrowded as it was in Pisa. I could just walk into any of the buildings I wanted to without a delay, which was a real treat. But again, in addition to the big sites, I like to just kind of melt into the local community, really savor and appreciate where I am. And for example, one thing I really enjoyed doing was participating in local customs. In the case of Italy, if someone wants to get a cup of coffee in the afternoon, rather than go to a Starbucks and get a takeaway coffee, they go and stand at a big marble counter and they order their coffee and they drink it standing. So I had a good time doing that in different places. And then you start to notice different cities have different pastries that go along with the coffee. So this was in Rome. I realized everyone was eating this big puffy brioche roll stuffed with whipped cream. And so I thought, well, I should order one too. I wouldn't normally get a sugar bomb like that for breakfast, but it really just felt right here. Or in Naples, the sfogliatella, beautiful crispy pastry. One of my favorite breakfasts on the entire trip was in Siena. I just went to this great cafe and they had an outdoor table and I sat out and just had a coffee and a simple croissant and watched the city kind of wake up for the day. And these are the kind of moments I realized during the pandemic, these were the moments that I really missed. And so I really made a point to seek them out and make time for them. So I hope when you travel this year, you can do that as well. A lot of people are really interested in what we do when we're updating our guidebooks. It's a very ambitious task and it might seem a little bit mysterious. I also think a lot of people think updating a guidebook is very glamorous. People will say to me sometimes, well, do you need an assistant? Are you looking for a replacement? And I got to say, I absolutely love my work, but it is work. It's very hard work and it's easy to romanticize it. I'm sure people think you're getting paid to update guidebooks in Europe. It's just every day is beautiful and sunny and you're hiking at the top of a mountain. And there are days like that. There are days where you think to yourself, I cannot believe I'm getting paid for this. And then there are days like this. This was a day I had in Scotland where it was sideways raining all day long. And it doesn't matter when you're doing guidebook research. You're not on vacation. If you've got work to do, it's rain or shine. It doesn't matter how hard it's raining. You have to hike up that hill 10 minutes to check that B&B. And if they're not home, you just have to hike right back down and go back the next day again. So it is a lot of work. I don't expect a lot of sympathy for this, but it's sort of a reality check. It's also just physically hard work. When I'm home, I strive to get 10,000 steps a day. I kind of track my steps. When I'm doing research, especially in a place like London or Rome, easily I get 20, 25,000 steps a day without even thinking about it. And that's because I really try to get to every place. And this, I think, sometimes surprises people. They think, well, when you're updating a guidebook, you're just probably checking hours on the website or maybe giving them a phone call. No, the way that Rick taught me to do guidebook research way back 22 years ago, we personally try to go and visit every single place: hotels, B&Bs, restaurants, laundromats, train stations, tourist offices, every museum, every church. We physically go, we look at it. Rick likes to talk about we're living the book. We're actually trying everything the way we describe it to make sure it really works. And so, for example, if you're in Rome, there's the Capitoline Hill, which is in the center of town, has 3 great sites that are all right near the top of that hill. They're practically touching each other. But the problem is, if you want to go between them, you have to go all the way down the hill, and then go next door and climb the stairs all the way back up. So if you're at the Capitoline Museums here, okay, I've updated that. I have to go, there's a church right next door, right? The Santa Maria in Aracoli. I wish I could just kind of hop the fence and go in that church, but I don't get to do that. I have to go all the way down the stairs and then back up another flight of stairs. And then next door to that is the Victor Emmanuel Monument. Again, I have to go all the way down and all the way back up. So it's pretty grueling. You also have to have a lot of patience. There's a lot of detailed questions that you're trying to ask. So you spend a lot of time in long lines, and then when you get to the front, you got to have your questions ready, and they're very precise, and they're very kind of annoying questions, and they're the kind of things that no one likes to have to worry about. What are the hours in the summer and the winter? You know, what is the price for the audio guide? This sort of thing. And so it's just a lot of talking to people, asking questions. It's really critical to be organized. That's kind of the secret to it. In fact, I'll tell you a little bit about kind of my process here. So these are the books that I've worked on updating so far this year on my various trips. And then for each one, when you start the day, first of all, you want to read through it really carefully and make sure you kind of know what's in the book, obviously. And then this is how Rick taught me to do it. You kind of go through and you put a little box, little empty check mark box next to each thing you have to check. And remember, each of these things you have to check in person. Go talk to somebody. You'll organize your time really smartly to make sure you're not doing any backtracking. You kind of put things in geographical order, and then you just go and start knocking on doors and ringing doorbells and asking questions. And then when you make updates, what we do is we try to mark most of them on the page of the book so we can easily see later to transpose them or to transcribe them. And then if you run out of room on the book, these are the many little notebooks in addition to those books. So if I run out of space on the page of the book, I bring out my little notebook and I scrawl some notes here, okay? And so by the end of the day, you've got piles of notes in different places. And then you have to go back to your hotel room. And much as I'd like to kind of have a nice long dinner and then go to bed early, I've got many, many pages that are marked up like this one. And I have to go back to my bed, and if I have a desk, I have a desk. Sometimes I don't have a desk. I have to spread it all out, get it organized. Usually you have, printed schedules and little, business cards for hotels and restaurants you want to add to the book, and basically spend a few hours doing my writing. Most nights I spend 2 or 3 hours in my hotel room just typing up all of my notes. Sometimes I get lucky and I have a beautiful setting to do my work in, but a lot more often than that, you just have sort of a crummy little hotel room with a chintzy little desk in the corner and an underpowered light, and you're kind of squinting and trying to see your notes. And sometimes I even use the light on my phone so I can see my notes better to type them up. So again, it's not exactly glamorous, but it's really worth it. And I gotta say, one of the things I loved about being back in Europe on location is I got to see people all over Europe using our guidebooks. And it was a great reminder for me why we work this hard, why it's worth all of this effort. These are just some random people I saw out on the street using our book, and I snuck a picture of them because it just made me happy to see people using the book. By the way, now I've done all of these books so far this year, but I'm only one of 20 guidebook researchers. So there's Rick, and he's also done quite a lot of guidebook research this year, and we have 18 others as well. I talked to our managing editor, whose name is Jennifer Madison Davis, this morning, and she keeps us all very well organized. And she told me in a normal year, we do about 350 days of guidebook research. This year, we're doing 500 days of guidebook research because we really want to get this updated material into your hands. So we're doing a super accelerated schedule. And so that means we're just all the time, we've got several people at the same time in different parts of Europe updating the books. We have our editors back at our book house across the street from our headquarters, cranking full time to get these books turned around. Our goal is to get as many books to you updated for the post-pandemic reality as soon as possible. So those first 2 books that I worked on, Rome and London, back in March and February, the London book should be here as soon as next month. We're hoping in August, just to give you a sense of how fast the turnaround is on these. We're trying to get our 20 best-selling books on bookshelves by Christmas. And then through 2023, we're just going to be constantly updating. Every couple of weeks, there's going to be a new book coming out. We're just not going to stop till they're all fully up to date. By the way, people ask me sometimes, how do I know when the new edition is coming? I've got a trip coming up in X months, and I want to know if I should use the current book or if I should wait for the new one. Well, here's how you do it. You go on our Rick Steves website, ricksteves.com, and find the guidebook page. And then you click on the guidebook you're interested in. So for example, London, and then on the London page, you see where it says product details at the bottom. If you click on that little plus sign, it drops down the product details menu. And you see at the very bottom, it says the next edition arrives August 2022. And we have that information for all of our guidebooks. So you can easily find out when is the new edition coming for the guidebook that you're interested in. I will say, not all the books are going to be out maybe in time for your trip, but I would say, having just spent all this time updating these books, I would feel pretty good about taking our most recent edition, even if it's not the newly updated one. There's definitely been changes, but I'd say the fundamental travel wisdom and the advice and a lot of our kind of what I think of as some of our most important coverage are our sightseeing information, our self-guided walks and tours, our selections of our favorite restaurants and museums and hotels. Most of that has not changed that much. I will say, if you're using a not fully up-to-date guidebook, a couple things to be aware of. First of all, a lot of places have changed their hours pretty dramatically, largely because of staffing concerns, sometimes because of COVID policies that are still in effect. So museums might have different closed days or different closed times. Restaurants might have different closed days. If you have your heart set on anything, go on the website for that place and check the very latest on their hours. Just to make sure that they're open when you want to go there. The other thing I would suggest is there's a lot of need to reserve ahead. There's a lot of places that used to be able to walk right in, but there's a lot of demand right now. So be aware of when you need to book ahead, whether it's a museum or a restaurant. It's smart to be ahead of the curve on that sort of thing these days. And I would say, just in general, be flexible, be prepared. You know, these guidebooks are great, but they're a couple years old now. And if you have to use the old one, just assume that some things are going to be different and you're going to have to kind of improvise a little bit. So, Lisa, I think this is a good time to take a little pause and see if anyone has any questions. Has anything come up that I can clarify?
Oh, yes. Well, some things are clarifications, but I love this question from Susan. Are red British phone booths becoming a thing of the past with cell phone usage?
It's funny, they've kept the booths, but they don't have phones in them anymore. This is definitely a trend. In fact, in some cases, they've put in other things. I think one trend is they have these defibrillators. Some of the old red telephone boxes are being used as emergency defibrillator stations. You see them that have turned into garden planters or whatever. So like, it's kind of like they don't dare actually get rid of the booth, but almost never will there be a phone inside. Usually the phones in a lot of places have been decommissioned.
I love the idea of defibrillators being in there. Let's see. Andrea wants to know, are most London sites now requiring timed entries?
That's a great question. A lot of them allow timed entries, and some of them, if you look on their website, they'll say booking advised. But I would say, on the one hand, there are places that are really busy and you might not even be able to get in without a reservation. For those, you really want to make sure you reserve. On the other hand, there are smaller museums that, because of COVID, they've created a system where you can reserve, but you don't really need to. And I would say, if you don't need to reserve, I wouldn't, because then you're kind of tied into a certain time and it's a little stressful. It adds stress to your day. I have to be there at 3 o'clock instead of just showing up when you want to. So I would say it's most places now allow you to make reservations, but you, as a traveler, you want to try to distinguish between the ones where it actually is important and ones where it's just kind of optional. But I would say the shorthand is any major museum, any really famous museum, like in London, the British Museum, or the National Gallery, National Portrait Gallery, anything like that. You should go ahead and make a reservation ahead of time. It's a good idea.
Okay, and then there were some questions about the tap payment. So Leslie asked, does the tap payment work in Eastern Europe, like Poland, or rural areas in your experience?
It's been so widely adopted. It's kind of, I have not found a lot of places where it doesn't work just like a credit card used to work, including in Poland. I just spent a couple of weeks in Poland, and even in anywhere that accepts credit card now accepts the tap payment. It's very common now.
And have you had any problems with false charges showing up because of somebody scanning?
I have not, and I don't know the technology here, but I understand that the way the tap payment works, I'm getting out of my depth here, but I did read an article once about the way that the tap payment works is actually quite secure. It seems like reckless that anyone could just grab your number, but my understanding is it has to do with the way it interacts with the PayPad, that it's pretty secure. There's no credit card transaction that's entirely secure, but I don't think it's any worse than most, as far as I'm aware.
Well, that's what I love about my watch though, because I have to double click it before it'll come up. And I do keep an RFID blocking sleeve in my money belt, just one, but I keep it in front and I feel like that protects me to some extent.
Yeah.
And Jackie asks, do you have a favorite area to stay in London?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. And I would say, I thought a lot about this. I don't have a favorite place to stay. I've stayed in all different neighborhoods. And for me, each one has pros and cons. I really think carefully about which tube line it's on and whether it connects efficiently to the areas I want to go to. So sometimes if I'm looking at places to stay, I'll actually, to decide whether to stay there, I'll look at the tube map and I'll say, can I get to this part of town without having to take an extra connection? Because I think that makes a difference. I'm curious about you, Lisa. You spent a lot of time in London. Do you have a favorite neighborhood?
There are a lot of neighborhoods that I like for different reasons, but specifically for the tube reason, I like Bayswater because there's two tube stations very close to each other that operate on separate lines. So it gives me double the chances of being able to get somewhere efficiently.
Yeah, I agree. I've stayed in that neighborhood and I know what you mean. Depending on where you're going, you can always get there. You can get to most places without having to change.
That's it for me.
Great. Cool. Before we get back into the next part, I will say, if you were interested in what I just talked about with how to do guidebook research, I had to do it pretty quickly, but I mentioned that I did this memoir that I wrote during the pandemic called The Temporary European. I actually have a whole chapter in here, in addition to all the travel stories. There's a whole chapter specifically about how we do our guidebook research. And it really gets in depth about the process and kind of some funny stories that came up along the way. There's also a chapter about being a tour guide and a chapter about making TV. And if you were watching us back in February, Rick and I did a joint Monday Night Travel about this. And it wasn't in stock yet because we had these supply chain issues. And anyway, Rick wanted to honor the original price for that. So he said, for this week only, we're going to do 30% off. So if you didn't get to get this back in March or back in February, when we did our Monday Night Travel, this week only on ricksteves.com, you can get this for 30% off again.
Now, I would just like to make a plug for that because I paid full price for it and it was worth every penny. But if you like the guidebook research information, this is the book that has the dirt in it, the stories, the funny stories.
Yeah.
I actually was in Italy reading about the guidebook research, and I knew the story because it happened to a friend of ours, but I thought it was so much fun to be sitting there in Italy, not that far from where this happened. And I loved your ability to describe things so vividly. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the book is not exactly about doing guidebook research other than that chapter, but it's sort of all the things that happen to me while I'm doing guidebook research. So you kind of get a lot of insights along the way. So good. Well, let's dig right into my next trip. Thanks for those great questions, by the way. Those are really good questions. So I was home from Europe, from London and Rome for only about, I think 5 weeks. And it was already time to pack up and head out again. And when I pack my bag, first I make a mess, I spread everything out, and then I slowly get it compact into the bag. Hopped on the plane, put on that N95 again, and ended up in Gdansk in Poland. And this was a really special trip for me. This was a long 7-week trip, but I started out doing this really wonderful experience, which was I was there to help lead our very first ever Poland tour. And it's interesting because Rick and I, for years, we both had this affection for Poland, and we've always kind of had a soft spot for it. And then in 2018, we each made a trip to Poland working on our guidebook. I'm the co-author of our Poland guidebook. And Rick and I each took trips to kind of spiff things up there. And we each came back and compared notes and had the same experience, which we kind of said to each other, Poland's always been great, but it's kind of made some big strides more recently. And it just really feels ready for prime time. And it feels very deserving of having its own tour. So Rick gave his green light to do a new Poland tour. And I worked really closely with Robin Stencil, who's a brilliant woman who works in our tour department. And she's really gifted at designing new tours. So she and I put our heads together and we collected information from a lot of tour guides and made a list of our favorite experiences. And then she went over and did a scouting trip in a car. And then we came up with this really great itinerary. It's the best of Poland in 10 days. And as you can see there, it just starts in Gdansk in the north and works its way south. And we were so excited to finally do this tour. We had a shakedown tour, sort of a first tour, introductory tour, planned for September of 2020. And like a lot of things in 2020, it couldn't happen. We had to postpone it. So a year and a half later, May of 2022, we were finally able to go to Poland and do this Best of Poland in 10 Days tour. And man, it was just wonderful landing in Gdansk. And then I got to go and meet up with these great tour guides. And I will say one fun thing about doing a brand new tour is you often get extra guides, you kind of get bonus tour guides, because we're all trying to kind of work together to figure out what works and what doesn't, and to kind of train each other on how to do it. And so it was, this was a 5-guide tour. And I was sort of officially the lead guide, but I had 4 Polish guides with me, and they all knew way more about Poland than I did. So it was really fun to kind of hand the mic off to them and let them do a lot of the teaching. And I was kind of just there to kind of be the presence from the office and make sure that everything was going smoothly. But it was great working with this group of guides. And then our tour group showed up, and that was also a wonderful group of people. We had such a great group of folks on this tour. They knew it was the first tour, and they were great spirits about it. You know, about half of the people on our tour actually have Polish ancestry, as do I. I'm one quarter Polish. And that was really fun too, because we got to see over the course of the tour, some of them were really well connected to their personal heritage, but others they knew they were Polish, or they kind of knew some things, but they never really had a chance to learn more about it. And it was really a beautiful thing on this tour to see the way that these people connected with their own Polish heritage and their own Polish history. That was a really special element of the tour for me. And they were just great people. We had fun getting to know them. So I'll talk quickly through kind of what we do on the tour, but then I want to talk just a little bit after that about what it's like leading a brand new tour, which was kind of an interesting experience. So the tour starts off in Gdansk, which is this beautiful city up in the northern coast of Poland. And a lot of people, I think, would look at this and say, well, that doesn't really look like Poland. It looks more like Scandinavia or maybe the Low Countries. And that's because this was sort of Poland's Baltic port. And it has sort of a history in common with a lot of these Scandinavian cities. It was part of the Hanseatic League of trading city-states and so forth. So Gdansk is a great place to start the tour. It was a great surprise, I think, for our tour members. If you know anything about Gdansk, what might be familiar to you is that this is where Lech Wałęsa first staged the solidarity protests at the shipyards back in 1980, which eventually ended up leading to the fall of communism in Poland. So we were able to go to this fantastic museum right there in the shipyards with our group and learn the story of Lech Wałęsa. From Gdansk, we went on to Malbork Castle, which is a huge red brick castle. This was the headquarters of the Teutonic Knights up on the northern part of Poland. Did a tour of the castle. And then from there, we went nearby to a beautiful smaller city called Torun. And this is a place a lot of people haven't heard of, Torun, but I would say our tour members fell in love with it. They just were really enchanted by this place. It's just a beautiful red brick city. It has a couple of claims to fame. It's known as the birthplace of Copernicus. It also is traditionally known for its gingerbread making, but people just had a great night here to kind of recover before they moved on to the next part of the tour. From there, the next day, we went to this great open air folk museum. And this is where it's really fun at Rick Steves Europe because it's such a great team of travelers. And the collaboration on creating a new tour is really interesting. We knew we wanted an open air folk museum, and the guides had a few ideas, but when Robin Stencil from our office went on her scouting tour, she discovered this perfect open air folk museum that was exactly what we wanted, that none of the guides had ever even heard of. And it just turned out to be a great find and a wonderful addition to the tour. And it gave us a taste of kind of the Polish countryside. And then from there, we headed into the big city of Warsaw. We got 3 nights in Warsaw, the capital city of Poland. So we had time for a walking tour, of course, around the old town of Warsaw and learned a lot about the city's history. And then we also got to take people to the Jewish Heritage Museum in Warsaw, which to me is one of my favorite historical museums anywhere in Europe. And this is where it was so exciting finally getting to do this tour, because for years I've just loved this museum. And I always think I wish I could bring a group here with a great guide. And we had a great guide and a great group, and they just had a wonderful time here at the Jewish Museum in Warsaw. Just a great experience. I mentioned earlier the idea of sort of being a temporary European and finding those sort of special moments. Well, we had one of those on this tour. This is a statue of Friedrich Chopin, the composer of Polish ancestry, in a beautiful big park called Łazienki Park. And Warsaw has this great tradition. For 60-something years on Sundays in the summer, they have open air Chopin concerts in front of this statue. We happened to be there with our group the first time they were doing this concert again since before the pandemic. The first time since 2019, they were able to do this sort of treasured tradition. And it was so beautiful. And we were surrounded by all these Polish people who were just loving listening to the music of Chopin that means so much to them. We felt like we were some of the only tourists at the entire thing. And it was just one of those magical experiences where we felt like we were really part of European culture. It was really special. And then from there on the tour, we go down to the historic capital of Poland, which is Krakow. And if you've been anywhere in Poland, it's probably Krakow. It's a very beautiful historic city, lots of great churches and museums and palaces. It's the former seat of power. So you've got kind of the old cathedral and the old castle of the Polish kings. So of course, we took some time to do some walking tours and introduce our tour members to the great sights of Krakow. But we also wanted to do something experiential. And we always try to find this sort of thing for our tours. So a couple of our tour guides said, you know, we can set up this experience where we do a pierogi making class. Pierogi are those kind of Polish dumplings that are kind of the classic Polish food. And so we said, sure, let's do it. And actually the way it worked is we started by going to the market, and we had the tour members had to actually give them a list of the things they needed to buy. And we taught them the Polish words for the things they needed. And so they went around and actually talked to the vendors, and we taught them how to say, hello, please, I would like this, thank you. And the vendors were good sports about it. So we bought the ingredients, and then we split up into small groups and actually went into local homes and learned how to make pierogi from scratch, from just raw ingredients, just the way that your grandma would make them, you know? And it was just a really beautiful experience learning how to knead the dough and roll it out in the very precise way you have to fold the pierogi. And it was just a great experience. And each of the small groups then, of course, got to finish by enjoying eating the pierogi they had made. And I think for a lot of us on the tour, this was just kind of a real highlight experience. And it's the kind of stuff we try to do on all our tours. We want to take you to the big sites and have great guides to explain it, but we also like to have experiences, hands-on experiences like this. Overall, yeah, it was a wonderful tour. And for me, it was a really special treat. You can see in the front row of this picture, working with this fantastic team of Polish tour guides. And, you know, we'd be busy all day with our tour members, and then we might have free time in the evening for dinner. And we would just get together and spend the whole evening over dinner going over what had gone well that day and what we might want to change and so forth. And it was just really fun getting to know these folks and learning from them, learning from each other. And it was especially fun then when we were with these guides the whole time, but then when we got to their home territory, they got to kind of take center stage and tell the story of the place that they were from. So Agnieszka was so excited to be able to tell the tour members about Gdansk, her hometown. And then when we got to Krakow, Monika was able to tell us about her hometown. And it was really a special experience and a lot of fun. And for me, it was really interesting because, as I talked about earlier, I do a lot of guidebook research. I used to do a lot of tour guiding also, but at a certain point, I was kind of pulled in two directions. And I said, you know, I really want to focus on one of these things. And I decided to focus on the guidebook research. So it had been quite a few years since I actually had led a tour. But this was a really special occasion that was enough to kind of lure me out of retirement. But I was kind of nervous. I was like, have things changed a lot? You know, what's different about doing tours now versus when I was doing them? And I remember, Elisa, you probably remember this. I think I was about a week before my tour, and I think you were leaving in a day or two for your tour. And you very graciously took my phone call, and I just asked you a bunch of questions about, like, how does this work now? Is this different? You know, and it's great at Rick Steves because we all kind of learn from each other. And it was so helpful getting your insights, but also at the end of the day, what you told me was right, which is that the fundamentals of good guiding and good tours are always the same. It kind of, the technology come and go, but in the end, kind of being a tour guide and putting on a good tour is basically the same no matter when you're doing it. And I definitely found that to be the case. So it was fun being back on the bus and being back in the saddle as a tour guide. Now it was interesting doing the first iteration of this tour. And I've had some experience being on the first tours before. So back in 2001, I was the assistant guide on the first ever Best of Eastern Europe tour. And then in 2007, I was the lead guide on the first ever Best of the Adriatic tour. So this was my first tour. And I have to say, compared to those two, this thing went incredibly smoothly. I was amazed at how well crafted it was. Robin and Casey, who works with her in the office, and other people in our office had set things up so beautifully, and it all came off without a hitch. The people on the tour kept saying, "We can't believe this is the first time you've done this." It was so perfect. You know, there are always surprises and adjustments. So for example, we did this great vodka tasting, And there was too much food at the vodka tasting. We knew there'd be some light food, but we didn't realize there'd be this huge traditional spread. And a couple people had actually had dinner beforehand because they didn't realize how much food would be there. Well, now we know that we should warn people there's going to be a lot of food. You don't need dinner tonight, you know. The other thing that was kind of funny was in this town of Torun, which I mentioned earlier, kind of the red brick town that's famous for gingerbread, we were going to do a gingerbread demonstration. So when the bus came into town, we dropped off the tour members and got them oriented. And then the guides ran over to the gingerbread museum to confirm the details. And we didn't realize until that moment, well, yes, we're going to be doing a demonstration for your group, but there's also going to be about 50 Polish school children on a field trip in the same demonstration, which we were kind of shocked at first. We thought it was going to be a private thing. And so it was really funny. The guide kind of came and did this big showy presentation. And then there was another guide using our whisper systems on the microphone who did a simultaneous translation. And that was just really a trip because there's a couple of things that was, at one point, the guy translating said, "I cannot translate this joke. It works only in Polish." And so it was fun. And actually, I think it was unexpected. But our tour members at the end of the day, a lot of them said they actually liked it this way because it was fun to see the kids and their excitement. We kind of fed off the excitement of the kids as they made the gingerbread. And we also still got to do everything we were going to do anyway. We got to roll out the gingerbread and stamp out the shapes. And it was a fun activity. Now, the other thing that was a big factor in this tour, and actually I would say a factor in European travel in general this spring and summer, is of course the war in Ukraine. In fact, I was in London in February, just so happens when the war started. And within a couple of days, you were already seeing a lot of protests around London. In fact, I was walking along this street and I saw this bunch of people who were shouting across the street at this building. And I suddenly realized this is the Russian embassy. This is a kind of a protest. And by the time I left London, this was a week later, there was a huge protest filling Trafalgar Square. And I would say if you're traveling in Europe this year, you'll be aware of this, especially if you tune into it. It's funny, I kind of think there's this irony that Putin, by starting this terrible war, we're living in a time where people are so polarized and no one can agree on anything. And yet Putin has done this incredible feat of turning everybody in Europe against him. Suddenly all of the Europeans are united in agreeing that this war is a terrible thing and must be stopped. And so, for example, traveling around Italy, there was a huge protest in the main square in Naples. And then I was in Pisa, up in Tuscany. And if you have to kind of pay attention for these things, but here I saw they have the flag in the middle there of the European Union in Italy, and then they also have the flag of Ukraine, showing solidarity with Ukrainians. And then you see the rainbow flags on the side. That's in Italy, that's a symbol for peace. You know, it's the Pace flag. Then I was in Siena, and they have this beautiful fountain that's lit up at night. And I was walking by it one night, and I noticed it looked kind of funny, and I realized they changed the color of the light so that it would be the yellow and the blue of the Ukrainian flag in this fountain. And then later in June, I was in Scotland, and I walked off the plane, and here's a sign in Ukrainian saying, "Hey, welcome to Scotland. We're here to help you. You know, here's what to do if you're a refugee who's just arrived and you need help." Also in Scotland, I was in Edinburgh on a Sunday afternoon, and there was a big protest in the park. Even in little villages, this is a little village called Dufftown in Scotland. And I was sitting admiring the clock tower in this tiny village, and I noticed the clock tower was flying a Ukrainian flag. So this is something, if you're especially paying attention, you'll notice a lot of this traveling in Europe this year. Now in Poland, the war in Ukraine was an especially important thing because, of course, Poland and Ukraine are neighbors. In fact, on the tour, at one point, we were as close as 150 miles from Ukraine. So when we started the tour, people were kind of nervous about, you know, are we going to be safe here? Is there any chance the war is going to spill over? We talked about it a lot at the beginning of the tour. And I would say, as it turns out, all of our tour members unanimously agreed they felt completely safe. In fact, it's kind of a dark joke, but I like to say the only Russian tank we saw was the one that was parked in front of a museum, you know, a historical museum. At the end of the day, the fighting has been really contained in Ukraine. And Poland, in some ways, it's really a shame that people are staying away from Poland because I think they really deserve our support. Poland has done an amazing job as the neighbor of Ukraine, stepping up. They've taken in something like 2 million refugees into Poland. A lot of them are actually starting to go back now. There's parts of Ukraine that are stable enough that they can return. But these 2 million Ukrainian refugees have all kind of found homes around Poland. And in fact, in a strange way, it was almost, I think, it added to the tour that we were there during this war, because our tour members, because we had these great Polish guides, we got to really understand what was going on, and we could kind of understand it from a local perspective and really see what Poland was doing to help all the Ukrainian refugees. So for example, our hotel in Warsaw is run by a wonderful guy named Jacek, which you can see here. And we did a fun kind of rooftop Q&A one evening. He's very politically active and he has a lot of opinions. So we wanted to give the tour members a chance to learn from him. And it was really eye-opening to learn from Jacek and to hear about his experience. And he's also a very conscientious guy. So he's hired a lot of Ukrainian refugees to work at his hotel. And after this meeting, we were, as the guides group, we were talking and said, you know, we had a dinner planned in Warsaw a couple nights later that was just sort of a typical Polish meal. We thought, you know, wouldn't it be interesting with what's going on in the world if instead our group could have Ukrainian food cooked by Ukrainian people who are working in Jarek's hotel? And so we actually called Jacek and we said, you know, is there any chance that you could set this up for us? And he said, you know, our chefs, they're Ukrainian, but they usually cook Polish food because it's a Polish restaurant. But they would actually be honored to be able to cook their national dishes for you. And so we just had an amazing dinner with the tour of Ukrainian classics cooked by Ukrainian people in Warsaw. Jacek even found a young woman who was able to play the traditional bandura, which is a traditional Ukrainian stringed instrument. It's just really a beautiful experience. And as I said, I think it actually added a lot. It enhanced the tour in a lot of ways to help understand what was going on in this part of the world at this time in history. So, you know, overall, I had a great time doing this Poland tour. And like I said, I was amazed at how smooth it went. I think the tour guides are fantastic. You would be incredibly lucky if you're going on this tour to have any of these guides that I worked with. They're all out leading tours now. Ever since the one we did in May, each week they kind of a new one starts a tour. So if you're thinking about where to go next year, you're kind of comparison shopping tours, I really strongly recommend giving the Poland tour a careful look. I think you'd enjoy it. So I'm going to take a little pause now, Lisa, and my last chapter coming up soon is Scotland. But before we do that, I wondered if you had any more questions from our listeners or viewers.
I have so many questions. Actually, I'm going to start with a two-part question from Pat. Pat says, they loved your book and they want to know if there are any plans on a sequel to The Temporary European.
No, not a direct sequel. And frankly, I'm too busy this year updating guidebooks that I can't even think about doing anything else. But, you know, I don't think anyone's ever written a book without having a few ideas in the back of their head of what might come next. So stay tuned someday. But 2022, the focus is getting our Rick Steves guidebooks completely up to date post-COVID.
Okay, so the second part of that question then is, any plans for you to guide more Poland tours next year?
Good question. I mean, I'm very tempted. I the whole time I was on the tour, I kept saying, like, remind me why I don't do this more often. This is great. But, you know, there's so much other stuff to do. And I also think that these guides that I worked with are just so exceptional. I can't hold a candle to them. And it's so exciting being able to have somebody who's from one of these cities to tell you about it. So there's no plans for that. Although, you know, who knows? Someday I might go back to it.
I would argue that you're an effective communicator and you have a lot of knowledge. So I wouldn't say that.
Well, Lisa, you and I talk about this sometimes. You know, we have some of our guides who are Europeans and some who are Americans, and I think there are pros and cons either way. You get different advantages, I think, and maybe some different disadvantages depending on which you get. But I guess I'm just so in awe of these particular guides. I feel like I was so impressed every time they took the mic. I would want to go with one of them.
Okay, well, talk about that more in the future. Andrea wanted to know if the guidebooks that you work on are also available as ebooks.
Yes, all of our books are available as ebooks, for example, in Kindle format. I would say guidebooks, we kind of, our consensus internally at the Rick Steves book department, guidebooks are not that well suited to the ebook format, because when you're doing a guidebook, when you think about it, it's nice to flip around back and forth. You know, it's organized in a way where you're at a museum and you want to look what restaurants are nearby, and you can just flip to the section on restaurants. Flipping back and forth is a lot harder with an ebook. You can search for keywords, that works a little bit. But for me, when I'm using a guidebook, I really like a paper guidebook. I like electronic versions of most things, but not guidebooks.
I really like part of a paper guidebook. I will, and librarians are freaking out right now, and I apologize, but I love that. I don't know, my computer just did that thing again. I love when I can just take the chapter that I need and carry that piece of papers around and have it be light and carefree instead of taking a brick of a book.
And you might have noticed that when I've never taken a guidebook to Europe without cutting out only the sections I need. So our Italy book, if you know our Italy book, it's usually like this. It looks like a Bible. And so anytime I go on a trip, I cut out only the chapters I need. And then you can see this, I staple them. You do it too, it looks, oh yeah, that's the full-size Italy book. I staple them and then I put clear packing tape. So I don't take any paper I don't need on a trip. Now, when you're doing
like this, I just like comparing them. Like,
yeah,
mine is so much bigger.
When you're doing the entire Scotland book, you need the entire book. But when I'm doing a smaller assignment, so that helps deal with at least the size and weight issue.
Okay, so Marie asked a very specific question, but I thought it was interesting. She wants to know if you see Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with Ermine in Krakow, or if there's time to do it in your free time.
We don't do it together, but we do have a free afternoon, and it's a great thing to see. So this is sort of a similar composition to the Mona Lisa. I think some art critics would say it's even better than the Mona Lisa for various artistic reasons, but far less famous. But yeah, it's owned by the Czartoryski Museum in Krakow. They were renovating the museum, so it's been moving around a lot, but it's been in Krakow still. So that's a great thing to do if you have free time on the tour. And if you're in Krakow on your own, definitely seek it out. It's called The Lady with the Ermine.
Okay, and then Terry wants to know, what kind of camera do you use?
Yes, I have most of my camera it's a big giant SLR. It's a Nikon D750, and I have two different lenses that I switch out. But I will say these days I use my iPhone for more and more pictures. So the slideshow you're watching right now, I'd say 2/3 of them were with my big, nice, fancy camera. I'd say as many as a quarter to a third of them are just with my iPhone. They've made light years of improvements on camera phone options in the last couple of years. I never would have taken pictures good enough to use for a slideshow until my latest generation, and it works great.
Fantastic. I will just say that the best thing I did with my phone is I got a little $1.99 strap, and now I can take pictures off of bridges without fearing that I will drop my phone.
Nice.
That's my tip for the day. You ready? You want to go
Good.
back?
Let's dive back in. So we're on to the final part 3, which is Scotland. So after all of that Poland work, I had another guidebook assignment, and that was about 3 weeks to update the entirety of our Scotland guidebook. And it was just great being back in Scotland. I started out in Edinburgh. By this time, it was early June. So we had some nice summery weather, great weather for going for a hike and just sitting out and enjoying the city, exploring some of the natural parts of Edinburgh. I'd never done this before, but someone on Facebook said, you should go walk on the Water of Leith Walkway, which is a river that runs through a kind of a quieter part of Edinburgh. And I really enjoyed that. And like I said earlier, one of my favorite things when I'm updating a guidebook in the UK is just connecting with our wonderful B&B owners. So there's a little neighborhood in Edinburgh. If you've been to Edinburgh using the Rick Steves book, you probably stayed at one of these. There's about a dozen of them. And I had a beautiful day where I just walked door to door and I rang the doorbell and I chatted with each of these people. And I guess the thing I want to say is they all said the same thing, which is how much they missed us and how excited they are to have us back. And I heard that sentiment everywhere I went in Europe this year doing guidebook research. They really missed us, the Europeans, and they're just thrilled that we're coming back now. And I think it's been really fun reuniting with these folks. And just in general in Scotland, I think for me, one of the big attractions is just chatting with people. I love just chatting with Scottish people. This is a bagpipe store in the town of Stirling. And I went in to update our information with this guy named Alan who runs the place. I ended up talking with a guy for an hour. I mean, about everything you can imagine. And it was just a wonderful conversation. I find myself losing track of time in Scotland and kind of getting behind in my work because I'm so tempted to just hang out and chat with these folks. I also enjoyed some great live music in Scotland, which I've done before a little bit, but I feel like the live music scene is kind of improving and getting a little more accessible. So I went to several pubs where I just had a great time listening to live music. In general, I just feel like the Scottish people make Scotland special. And it's something that I really enjoyed and kind of savored on this trip. After my time in Edinburgh, I went out on a road trip. I drove about 1,000 miles around the Scottish Highlands in my little Fiat Cinquecento, which I nicknamed Fergus. And man, I got to tell you, road tripping in Scotland is a delight. I think Scotland is kind of made for road tripping, and you're just constantly pulling over for amazing views. And I always love it when you find a view that's the cover of your guidebook. I was looking at this bridge and I suddenly said, that looks familiar. Oh, that's right. I know where I've seen that picture before. You know, traveling in Scotland, even in the summer, sometimes you have sunny days, sometimes not so much. And I think that's just something you have to get used to. Traveling really anywhere in the British Isles at any time of year, you never know what the weather's going to bring. But the nice thing about Scotland is whether it's cloudy and socked in or whether it's beautiful and sunny, it's still very beautiful. There's just so much to see and do. I just find it a gorgeous country to travel in. Lots of fun experiences. One thing that a lot of people really enjoy in Scotland are the Scottish Highland cattle, which are nicknamed the hairy coos. And they're kind of elusive. They're raised mainly for show, and you don't see a lot of them. But anyone who's driven around Scotland knows you're always kind of keeping an eye out for hairy coos. And when you see them, it's really tempting to pull over and take a picture. And even though it's kind of a touristy thing to do, I have to admit, I'm not immune to that. So I had this beautiful moment where I saw a couple of hairy coos on the side of the road in Isle of Skye and got some pictures. But then I was thinking about, it would be great, because I know there are people who really want to learn more about this unique Scottish animal. It would be great if there was a more accessible experience for that. And so somebody else on Facebook, again, gave me an outstanding tip that I'm really glad I went and checked out. This is one of my favorite finds that I made all year long. This is a farm called Cladich Farm, C-L-A-D-I-C-H, Cladich Farm. And it's basically a farm that raises Highland cattle. And you can go and get on an ATV and they drive you out to find the herds of the cattle. And because you're with the farmers, it's safe to kind of walk up, and the cows are comfortable around them. So you can walk up to them and actually like pet them. And like they gave me the brush at one point. I was actually brushing their coat. And so if you are a hairy coo fan and you're in Scotland, this is a really exciting find. They just started doing this shortly before the pandemic. Also, I was there in the summer, so I got to see some calves that were just really fun, and it was just kind of a great experience. It was one of those finds for the guidebook that I just get excited about. I will say there were some challenges to traveling this year in Scotland as well. And I would say this applies to Scotland, but I think some of what I'm about to tell you applies to a lot of Europe in general. This is a case study from Portree, which is the main town of the Isle of Skye. Now, Portree is a beautiful town, and Skye is a gorgeous island. But, you know, it's kind of a tough time to get back from COVID. And, you know, it's not like suddenly COVID's over and you flip a switch and everything works perfectly. You know, we're still struggling with COVID and places are still understaffed. And so a small town like Portree is not entirely up and running the way that they might like. One thing I noticed here and really all over Scotland, there are help wanted signs absolutely everywhere. It seems like every business has a help wanted sign in the window. You know, they had kind of a 1-2 punch in Scotland and the UK. First, they had the Great Resignation that came with COVID, the same stuff that we're having in the US, where just there's never enough staff for everything. And then the second punch was Brexit. We don't maybe realize because COVID was going on, but Brexit happened during COVID. So a lot of businesses lost their European staff. And so what I found was places are really understaffed, which meant that hours have been reduced. Places are crowded. There's not enough space to meet the demand. There are restaurants that have tables they can't use because there's no one to wait on them. There are restaurants that used to be open 7 days a week that have had to cut back to 3 or 4 days a week because that's all the staff they have. So this was another sign that I saw all over Scotland. You'd show up at a restaurant and the sign would say simply, "Our restaurant is fully booked tonight. Apologies for any inconvenience." So I would say, particularly if you're going to Scotland, and especially the smaller towns in the Highlands, places like Portree, be prepared for this kind of thing. You're going to find a lot of long lines, especially if you don't book ahead. In Portree, for example, this is a little cafe. It's a really nice cafe, but it's nothing fancy. And there's practically a line out the door every night because all of the nice restaurants, the fancy restaurants, they're booked out now weeks in advance. And even some of the humbler places are booked out 2 or 3 weeks in advance. And so you have every night, you have people kind of wandering around trying to find a place to have dinner. And you see people sitting out in the rain on a bench eating fish and chips because it's the only place open. So again, I don't want to be too doom and gloom about this, but if you don't want to end up having groceries back in your room, this was one dinner I had. I just couldn't deal with the fact that every restaurant was busy in Portree. So I went to a supermarket and I bought a microwave meal and I had it back in my room. This is a good option, but if you want to have a better experience than that, book ahead. And I'm saying this for Scotland, but my sense is in other places as well. I've heard of this happening in smaller towns in Italy and France. It's really kind of an early bird gets the worm, late bird gets microwaved Indian food kind of situation. So really book ahead and maybe farther ahead than you think, maybe even a few weeks ahead, start looking at restaurants to not to be kind of, stuck having groceries every night. And of course, the other trend that's happening everywhere in the world, everywhere in Europe, just like the US, is inflation. Prices are going up in all of these places as well. I thought this was really interesting. I saw this menu at a restaurant. You could see they've just gone with a Sharpie and they've added £1 to all the prices. I mean, that's the reality we're faced with. The gas, petrol in the UK is extremely expensive. I know this all sounds really like I'm being a downer, but I think it's just a reality check and just setting proper expectations. Again, we don't just turn a switch and COVID is over and everything's back to normal. If you're traveling this year, be prepared for a little bit of kind of inconvenience, high prices. And if you want to stay ahead of it, do some homework, book ahead, be ready for it. Great, so now we've come to the portion of the program that I think several of you have been waiting to hear about. And that has to do with one of the things I did on my road trip, which is for about the third or fourth time in my life, I drove by Loch Ness on my way out of Inverness. And I've seen this place before, and there are definitely things that I like about it, but just sort of as a critically eyed travel writer, I think it's a huge, incredibly deep loch. It's very beautiful. I think for me, the scenery isn't quite as spectacular as other parts of Scotland. For example, Glencoe. I love the Valley of Glencoe, which I went to a few days later. Isle of Skye, I think, has really amazing scenery. So I've always kind of been a little underwhelmed by the scenery here, but more than that, I just was really struck by how touristy it is. It's just a real tourist trap. Now I'm talking about the part of Loch Ness that the main road goes through out of Inverness. It's the place where all of the tourists and the tour buses stop at on their way through. And I gotta say, I was partly in a bad mood, and I thought about this. I'll talk about later what exactly triggered me, but I just was really put off by how kind of tacky touristy this was. And so that night I went to my B&B and I wrote a blog post, a Facebook post about why I don't like Loch Ness, and more specifically, why I don't like Loch Ness, but also why I think there are better places in Scotland where your time is better spent. And actually, I got initially a really positive response. A lot of travelers, the point of view I was using was, if you're a traveler, here's how to spend your time most wisely. And in my opinion, spending a ton of time at Loch Ness is not it. And a lot of travelers wrote and said, thank you so much. You're exactly right. I wish I hadn't spent that day at Loch Ness, or, I just stopped off quickly and I was glad that I did. And then something kind of strange happened, which is a day or two later, I started getting a lot more responses, and they were pretty upset. And most of them were Scottish people. And that's when I found out that a Glasgow-based tabloid newspaper called the Daily Record had somehow, because there's nothing else going on in the world apparently, had been scouring my social media presence and decided to turn this into a news story. And so suddenly there were a lot of people who were very mad at me for what I had said about Loch Ness. And I gotta say, it was pretty interesting finding myself part of this crazy 24-hour news cycle of British tabloids as more and more articles began to appear. It was a really surreal experience. It kind of got out of hand at a certain point. This was one of my favorite articles. I think the headline says it all. Tourism leaders say lay off Loch Ness after criticism from US travel writer Cameron Hewitt, who claimed the popular tourist attraction was boring and overhyped and that Nessie did not exist. Well, I have to admit, that's an entirely accurate headline. That's exactly right. But, there was a lot of people really frustrated with me. And this is where I started to think, I probably made some mistakes here. This was a gentleman who wanted to have a word with me, Willie Cameron, who runs the Loch Ness Klansman Hotel, who goes by the nickname Mr. Loch Ness. And he was very disappointed that with all the wonderful places in Scotland, I had dared to say that Loch Ness was disappointing. And you see at the bottom there, he said the post was purely to grab the headlines and to get his name known. He added, It was just to get publicity for Cameron Hewitt Productions. Who had ever heard of Cameron Hewitt before? Everybody knows about him now. And I would just like to say, on behalf of Cameron Hewitt Productions, the Temporary European is currently on sale on ricksteves.com for 30% off. So if you want to get a copy of the Temporary European, go to ricksteves.com and buy it right now, and you'll get a discount this week only while supplies last. Okay, so obviously that's a joke. I was not in any way looking for publicity. In fact, I was horrified that I was getting publicity for this. And in fact, the way that I was looking at it was as a traveler's advocate. And I feel like that's really what my job is. I advocate for travelers like you, and I try to help you make good decisions about how to spend your time. And if people actually had read the article, I talked about how I was really underwhelmed by Loch Ness, but I also talked about the reason why I was so frustrated with Loch Ness is there are so many other amazing things to see and do in Scotland, including very close to Loch Ness, that I think are so much more worth people's time. So for example, Culloden Battlefield is just as close to Inverness as Loch Ness is. It's fascinating, it's historic, it's the place where you had this great battle of the Jacobite uprising. The end of this battle resulted in the end of the Highland clan system. It's historic, there's an amazing state-of-the-art museum that tells the story. This is a great site. This is worth spending time at if you're in this area. Or if you want to see Scottish animals that actually exist, in our guidebook, we talk about a sheepdog show where you can actually go see trained sheepdog herd sheep, bring the sheep over to the shepherd. He actually literally crooks them by the neck and holds them down, and he shears off their fleece. This is a fascinating experience that really tells you something about Scottish heritage and culture and folk traditions. And it's just as close to Inverness as Loch Ness is. The point I was making is, as travelers, unfortunately, when you make an itinerary, it's kind of a zero-sum game. If you go to Loch Ness, that means you don't have time for something else. And so I was trying to encourage people to make different choices. What I didn't realize, frankly, I never thought anyone from Scotland would read this post. And I was horrified and embarrassed and actually felt pretty bad when I realized how many Scottish people were reading it and were offended by it. I would say the most succinct negative response I received was the guy who direct messaged me on Facebook and said simply, "You boring Yank twat." There were others who were a little bit more articulate. So for example, I had a response from this really thoughtful guy named Toby, who runs the website Loch Ness Living. And he made a really good case of why I was too dismissive and why there's actually wonderful things to do and see at Loch Ness, and I wasn't really giving it a chance, which I actually agree with. I think I was just kind of zipping past on the main highway. And he said, you know, if you had a few days to spend here, you'd find there's a lot to do and it's really beautiful. I would argue that the challenge is most casual tourists don't have a few days to spend. We are kind of trying to see things as efficiently as we can. But I thought the point was well taken. And I did feel pretty bad about it. I would say the whole thing kind of reached ahead when the BBC Scotland reached out to me and asked me to appear on their Friday night primetime news magazine program. And I turned them down. So I actually took a picture. This is the screen on the night that I would have been on this show if I had said yes. But I chose not to go on the show because, again, my intended audience was travelers like you who were trying to plan a trip. And I did not intend to offend Scottish people. And I thought if I go on a Scottish TV show, I'm just going to get more people angry about this who were never my intended audience. And I just didn't feel like, you know, if I was really seeking publicity for Cameron Hewitt Productions, you couldn't keep me off of the BBC. But I did not want at that point to make it worse. You know, the tourist board in Inverness, Loch Ness were also kind of frustrated with me. We kind of went back and forth a bit. And now this is where I feel like I do feel bad for the people I offended who lived there. But I think the thing that really bothered me about Loch Ness and the way they kind of pushed back about it was they keep saying, well, there's so much to see beyond Nessie at Loch Ness. And why don't you spend a few days here and learn about it? But the fact is, when you're actually traveling at Loch Ness, everything is steering you to Nessie. This is what they want you to see. This is what they're promoting. This is the easy way to experience Loch Ness. You really have to work hard to not let this kind of hijack your experience of Loch Ness. In fact, they used to have a tourist office right in this small town where all of this tourist stuff is that would help advise people, well, here's some other things to do. They actually closed that tourist office. It lost its funding. So I kind of feel like it's disingenuous to say we want people to come here and not pay attention to the Loch Ness Monster when that's clearly what they're steering people to. And I thought a lot about, after this all happened, why was that so offensive to me? What was what was so triggering to me about Loch Ness that I went on this rant? And as I mentioned, I wrote this memoir while I was on my, during the pandemic, while I took a sabbatical. And I really thought about what is good travel. When I was writing that book, I thought about what represents a good travel experience. And what became very clear to me, I think, is that Loch Ness Monster is not a good travel experience. There are a lot of sort of cultural symbols associated with Scotland. You've got kilts, and you've got bagpipes, and you've got whiskey and haggis and castles and hairy coups and golf. And the thing about all of those things is they actually have something meaningful to say about Scottish history. And the thing I think that really offended me about the Loch Ness Monster is it doesn't tell you anything about Scottish culture or history. It's just a gimmick. It's just a way to attract tourism. It's just a tourist trap. The loch itself may be beautiful and have a lot of important features, but the fact is most people who are going to Loch Ness are going to fixate on the Loch Ness Monster. So if I had gone on the BBC, I think what I would have said is I would have said, come on, Scotland. Is this really what you want Scotland to be known for? A hoax monster, a hoax sea monster? I think Scotland can do better. And I think the people actually who work and live at Loch Ness deserve better. If they want to talk about the natural beauty of the loch, promoting Nessie is probably not the way to do it. So that's my, my kind of word on the Loch Ness affair, or Nessiegate, as I've come to call it. Now, just to wrap up, I know I'm running out of time here. I thought my trip was over at this point. I finished my road trip in Glasgow, and I was just getting ready to go home. And the night before I was about to fly home, I started feeling kind of crummy. I had a scratchy throat. Then I woke up and I felt kind of worse. And so I said, as much as I'd like to get home, I'd better wait and I'd better take a COVID test just to be sure. And you remember earlier, I showed you the pictures of all those negative COVID tests. Well, when you get a positive COVID test, it's a pretty shocking thing. So keep in mind, this was the morning I was supposed to leave for Europe. It was day 46 of a 46-day trip. I made it 45 days without COVID. And I was stuck with a pretty tough decision because the US had lifted its requirement to test for COVID. So technically, I was allowed to go back to the US. The airline never asked me, have you had any symptoms? Do you know if you have COVID? No one ever asked me. Legally, there was no reason why I couldn't get on the plane and go back home. And I really wanted to get back home after this long trip. But, it was a tough call. But then I thought about the fact that, I really wasn't feeling well. I had just tested positive. That night, around the time I would have gotten on the plane, I had about 100-degree fever. I really was not feeling well. And I thought to myself, kind of the golden rule, would I want to be sitting next to me on this plane for 9 hours tonight? And the answer was very clearly no. So I decided I was going to postpone my flight home, and I kicked everything back a few days. So I basically spent the next several days isolating in my Glasgow hotel room. I got very cozy in here. Fortunately, I had a great view. You look out the window and there's the glass roof of the Glasgow train station. But I had plenty of time to think about how I ended up getting COVID to begin with, because as I talked about earlier, for most of my travels, I had been really careful, or I thought I was being careful. And even through the whole time in Scotland, I was still trying to wear a mask in situations like public transportation or crowded museums. This is a ferry that I took, and in the ferry terminal, there were hundreds of people just a few days before I got COVID, by the way, and I was the only one wearing a mask. But I will say I did let my guard down. I started going out to eat in restaurants. I wouldn't bother to put my mask on for one-on-one conversations because the person I was talking to was never wearing a mask. So I started to feel kind of silly wearing it. The thing that I think my mistake was, first of all, letting my guard down. My other mistake was I didn't pay attention a couple of weeks earlier when I started to hear that there were more cases in Scotland. I actually started seeing signs where like this cafe is actually closed because the whole staff has got COVID. And just sort of anecdotally, I kept hearing cases were on the rise. So I did what I've been doing the whole pandemic. I checked the official dashboards, the official data, and it sure didn't look like there was some huge increase. So I figured, well, it's probably okay. But what I realize now in retrospect is they're just not doing a lot of testing anymore. So I think this is kind of a wake-up call. If you're looking at case rates, official cases, as a barometer of how careful to be, you should be realistic that the data they're getting is not super accurate, because in Scotland, for example, I looked at the National Health Service website for Scotland, and they specifically said, if you have COVID symptoms, you probably don't even need to bother to test. They're actually telling people, don't bother testing, just assume you have COVID and be careful. And then I found out later, this hit right when I got home. The week that I had COVID, 1 in 18 people in Scotland had COVID. So with those numbers, if you're kind of being careful, that's not enough to keep you healthy. And so I think if you can learn something from what I did, I would say, first of all, don't just trust the official numbers, really pay attention, check the news. If you get a sense there's a big surge going on and you don't want to get COVID, that's not a time to let your guard down. I would say this is a chance where if you're paying attention to what's really happening, you can kind of dial up your precautions when things are getting kind of surgy. And if things are getting a little bit less, then you can maybe be a little bit less careful. For my part, I'd say when I hit the road again this fall, I'm going to be a little more careful about masking, and I'm definitely going to pay a lot more attention to what's going on in the places that I'm traveling, and not just assume that all the positive cases are being reported. So that was kind of a strange end of my trip. But the good news is I got through it very quickly. I feel very fortunate. I was vaccinated and double boosted. I got my second booster just a week before I got on this trip. So I think I had a very high immunity. And therefore I went very quickly through it. I was feeling rotten for maybe 2 days, but after 48 hours, I didn't have a fever anymore, and I was already starting to feel better, and I was able to get home a few days later. So I feel very fortunate that I was vaccinated, but it was still no fun getting COVID. And by the way, Lisa, I'm not the only one. I'm sure a lot of travelers are getting COVID, and I think you're one of them. Is that right?
Yes, I had COVID just 10 days ago.
God, wow.
Very exciting. So I got COVID in Italy, and you got COVID in Scotland. I think our experiences were a little bit different. Not the most important thing, but I think the mildly funny thing is it's almost impossible to tell if you have a fever when you're in Florence and it's 102 degrees.
Yeah.
I knew one night I had chills and I really didn't feel good, but the rest of the time I'm like, is it just me? I'm not. So
I'm a bit of a Boy Scout traveler, so I actually had a thermometer for exactly that reason, which helped.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Good for you.
I never used to travel with a thermometer, but since COVID, I decided I should have one with me just so I know.
So how was it in Scotland? Like, did you need meds, or how'd you get food? Or because
I was fine. What's funny is because when 1 in 18 people had it, and far from 1 in 18 were wearing masks. I mean, I was in a situation where the society I was in just was not being careful at all. So I really felt like an outlier that I was even aware of it and trying to be careful. I stayed in my room 23 hours a day, and maybe twice a day I'd go out for a walk. I would wear my best N95 mask, and I would sanitize my hands constantly anytime I touched anything, so I wouldn't spread it to them. For food, I was right by the train station, so there were a lot of these kind of like little grocery stores where you run in and grab stuff, and they have total contactless payment where you scan your own groceries and tap your credit card, and I could be in and out in a couple minutes. So that's how I got my food. So a couple times a day I'd go for a little walk and get some food, but otherwise I was in the hotel room.
Italy took its isolation very seriously, and because of that, they've upped their delivery game. So I had food delivered in the form of cooked food. I had groceries delivered. I had meds delivered, and because I didn't have any, I had a really, really bad congestion. And I even found that in Florence, Italy, you can get pints of Ben & Jerry's delivered to your apartment. And, in the capital of gelato, many people would think that's not what
I was going to say. Ben & Jerry's in Florence?
Okay, but I was sick and I wanted something from home.
Yes. So I would go out, and the other thing I did was I got McDonald's, and at one point I got Tim Hortons, just because when you're sick far from home, you get very homesick. And so I had this weird craving. I passed a Tim Hortons, and I was like, Tim Hortons sounds really good now. I would never get Tim Hortons normally, but yeah, I know what you mean.
I wanted top ramen. I wanted that broth.
Yeah,
really
yeah.
Anyway, okay. Yeah. We do have some questions. I would like to say for people, because I know you were talking about the ethics of it. I did wait until I tested negative before I flew home, because that was what was important to me, which is basically what was important to you. Scott Cowan from Chicago asks, is the Fringe Festival up and running for this year?
Yes, yeah. So August in Edinburgh is the Fringe Festival, but it's all sorts of stuff. The military tattoo, the big parade with the pipers and the drummers up at the castle. As far as I can tell, everything is scheduled, unless something changes, it's all fully back to normal in every regard, but specifically the festival, they're really excited about in August in Edinburgh.
Excellent. Kathy asked another Scotland question. She asked, how are the midges this summer? It's a midge, Cameron. What's going on with that?
The midges are these little tiny mosquitoes. I think we call them no-see-ums in some parts of the US. They're tiny mosquitoes and they're incredibly pesky and challenging when you're in Scotland. I would say my understanding is it's not about this summer versus last summer. It's more micro than that. If it's been rainy and then sunny, the midges are terrible. If it gets really windy, they blow the midges away. So while I was there, I didn't have too much trouble, but there were a couple of days where I started to notice them and I went and bought some bug spray and people were like, well, yeah, that's because it was really sunny for a long time. So they weren't breeding, and then it rained for a few days and then it was sunny again. So they had time to breed and then the sun was bringing them out. Midges are always an issue though in the Scottish Highlands. You just have to be prepared.
Oh, that's good advice. I didn't know about the weather being a factor.
Yeah.
Let's see. Jim asks if you think crowds of tourists will thin out in especially France and Italy in September and October.
I don't think so. I think we're going to see, I think it's just going to get busier and busier. September is already, it's a quieter time for Europeans to travel, but it's a huge month for Americans to travel. That's our biggest month for tours, by the way, on the Rick Steves tour. We sell more seats in September than any other month. So Americans love to travel in September. I would say people who might have been holding back in the spring are going to go ahead in the fall. So unless something changes, there's kind of a surge going on both sides of the Atlantic right now, and that might keep a few more people home. But I would expect things to get more crowded, not less crowded.
Okay. And then Zara asks, is there a way to prepare for local strikes or find out if they're happening?
Yes, they're almost always announced ahead of time. And so you can, if it's an English-speaking country or they have an English-speaking newspaper, you can just search for, strike in London or just start following the local news. You can also ask your hotel or your B&B. They would know for sure. That's the nice thing about strikes. The nice thing about strikes in Europe is they're usually announced in advance, almost always. And then what a lot of people don't know is if the trains are on strike, very often they're running a few kind of guaranteed or emergency trains. So I was in the south of France 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and there was a train strike and I was trying to get between cities and I thought, well, I can't do it. But I talked to my hotel and they said, well, no, actually, most of the trains aren't running, but they're still going to run once every 2 hours for people who need them. So I ended up taking the train that I would have taken anyway, happened to be one that was running. And not only was it running, it was empty. And I was the only person on it because everyone else had said, oh, the trains aren't running. So I would say in general, if you inform yourself, do a little homework, you can figure out what's going on exactly and how it affects you. If there's a language barrier, you can ask your hotel. The London, the day that there was a tube strike, I knew about it days. I was riding the tube that week and I kept hearing announcements and I didn't really listen to them because I assumed it didn't have anything to do with me. And then the third day I heard it, I was like, I better listen to this. And I realized they said, starting in 2 days, there'll be 2 days of tube strikes. And so then it was great though, because I was able to plan around it. And I did things those days that it didn't affect me and it didn't cause me any trouble at all.
Okay, last question. Jane and Robert want to know, is that the Queen over your shoulder?
That is the Queen over my shoulder. I happen to be in, by the way, there's a lot of Easter eggs over my shoulder. Did anyone notice the Loch Ness over my shoulder? The Loch Ness monster?
Put it in the Q&A if you noticed.
Yeah, so I was in Scotland during the Platinum Jubilee. And it was interesting because Scotland had no interest in the Platinum Jubilee for the most part. There were not a lot of festivities. They were also partly excited because the Queen comes up to Scotland a little later in the summer. So people told me they were kind of saving it up for then. But I kind of went on a hunt. I wanted to get some Platinum Jubilee swag. And I found this Walker's shortbread. I drove through the town where they make Walker's shortbread. It's a classic Scottish shortbread. And they have the commemorative Platinum Jubilee tin of Walker's shortbread.
Well, I think that's fantastic. I have mine, but mine doesn't have to do with the Queen, but mine I think is bigger.
Oh, you've got a double decker. So actually, Lisa, I bought this. If you're going to be in the office tomorrow, I bought this to, way back when at Rick Steves, people would bring back treats to share with everyone at the reception desk. And since COVID, we're kind of hybrid, so not everyone's in every day. And I don't think people are doing that much anymore. So I brought this specifically to share with the Rick Steves team to try to restart the tradition of people bringing back treats. So if you're in the office tomorrow, I'll put this out at Karen's desk and you can grab some royal shortbread.
Okay, I'm here for it. That's wonderful. That's actually my favorite thing about B&Bs, and that will actually be my last question. Do B&Bs in Scotland, England, do they still have tea kettles and little biscuits in the room?
Yeah, I think they call it a tea service, but every single, the cheapest, junkiest B&B in the UK is always going to have a little tray with a kettle and a couple of tea bags and a couple of individually wrapped biscuits and some sugar. And if you're lucky, maybe some cream. It's kind of like you cannot call yourself accommodations unless you have tea service in the room.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, Cameron, I want to thank you for being here. I've been lucky enough to work with you several times on Monday Night Travel, as well as I've been lucky enough to work with you for many years at Rick Steves. We would love to see you back in the fall. And we're going to get your 5-timer smoking jacket.
That's right. 5-timers club.
So
yeah, no, I'll be happy to come back anytime you'll have me.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for watching. It's great to reconnect with all of these wonderful Monday Night Travel people once again.
Thank you very much.